that made it beneficial for them to really keep going there. Tomato farmers allege that they take some things illegally in the empty trucks to Burkina. That's the reason. Whereas the trade of women claim that Ghanaian tomatoes are not all that good. And we have organized several meetings and they shout at each other. And we have not been able to really verify what takes them out there. There is a certain amount of price advantage that they get in Burkina. They can manipulate Burkinabe farmers to a far greater extent than the Ghanaian farmers. Okay. Tomato paste imports, again, see, they've been growing every year. Now you're really looking more than 100,000 tons is really being imported into the country. I'll get to this tomato processing at the end of it. The reason for we worked on tomato was really tomato processing. Around 2000, I mean, you still have that. 2005, 2009 and 2010, every week the newspaper had something about tomato growers objecting to something and starting up Paulugu plant and so forth. We said we must work on this issue. What really is the problem? Our hypothesis was this: your processing, that is tomato processing, really doesn't work, not because of any difficulties with the factory, but the difficulty is actually in the farm, being able to produce. And there was something else that was going along at the same time, which was the cassava processing. Both Nigeria went into cassava processing, Ghana went into cassava processing. You know, they both failed. And just before the elections, that the factory has started up all over again last week. Now it's a question of how long it is going to survive. But we wanted to prove that the problem is not in your industry. The problem is really agriculture, and that's what we wanted to. We can, and that is the reason we did the work on tomato. So in the processing, again the difficulty. The thing is, you can be uncompetitive in producing raw tomatoes. Okay? This is not a tradable. This is in the sense that you cannot ship it from Europe. You know, it is a local product. But when it comes to processed food, whether it is canned juice or whether it is canned processed tomato, then anybody can compete with you. Chinese can compete, Italians can compete, and that's really where the problem is. When you begin to make a process good, then you need to look at who are the competitors globally. These are the onion imports. Almost 60,000 metric tons are imported. Again, as you know, it's really 2/3 of the vegetables. I cook most of my meals and I shop for vegetables. Tomatoes and onions in this country are disappointing. You never find the same kind of onions consistently for 2 weeks. Every week it is different. This week there is a different variety. Next week there is something else there. Most of them are rotten inside. It's really disappointing if you have to do the cooking and shopping. And one would think, I always thought onion was a kind of a hardy vegetable, and all countries should be able to produce it, and it doesn't appear to be so. Well, in terms of production, what do we have? In tomato, you have multiple systems. For example, in Brangahafo, there you have rain-fed tomato. If you come up northeast, upper east, then they have irrigated tomato. So in Ghana, there is a number of systems in there. So tomatoes do become available at different points in time. So there is a staggered production to some extent, and it is produced under both rain-fed conditions as well as irrigated conditions. The Brangahafo in that area where they grow rain-fed tomato, it's a low-cost production, but that tomato is not suitable for processing. In some of those you have low input, low output, but very cost-effective production. On the other hand, you have high input, high output, that is the upper east, northeast. But then the production here is suffering, and I'll get back to that. But if you come to onions, the situation is quite different. It appears with what I hear, it's only upper east, which has been a traditional onion growing area, 20,000 households, 5,000 hectares of land, and apparently that's much less than what's in the neighboring countries. primarily during dry season. It's a dry season crop, and then the northern area is more suitable than the south for onion production kinds of things. So it's simply one season. We'll get to that. What is the reason for it and so forth. In terms of marketing, they both are perishable and perishable crops. Therefore, prices are quite seasonal. I mean, there is seasonality in other crops as well. And there are large variation possibly in onion prices compared to tomato prices. And in onions, prices go up from May to December, and then farmers bring the product, I think, sometime in April from the local goods, the local production. Storage is a problem, and then you can stagger your production because you are constrained to only give. Now, what is important, and one of the things that concerned us really about marketing is tomato. You know the tomato market queens. Okay? If you are sitting in Upper East, you can't load a truck of tomato and take it to any of the major markets. You have to wait for one of the market queens, one of the traders to come and pick up. They allocate, they go to this particular village and say, okay, here are 10 crates. You fill the 10 crates. This is what we're going to take from the village. A farmer has no choice. He can take small quantities and sell it in markets around, but he can't send it to the farm. So there is what you call a cartel. Okay? The traders sitting in the major markets can decide how much tomato comes into the market. A farmer cannot. Our colleagues have modeled that, which in effect shows that prices are indeed higher than otherwise they would be, and the farmers who manage to sell their tomato end up making more money than the rest of the farmers. But there is a limit, and same the traders can choose, rather than going to Upper East, I'm going to Burkina Faso and get the tomato, and that's that. And I don't know, you've been reading in the newspapers in negotiations, they've tried a number of things here. They brought the transporters and the traders and the farmer groups together. They came up with an agreement about certain share that need to be, the traders should purchase locally and so forth. I don't think any of that, we stopped following that. I don't think any of that has been effective. But the bottom line is, if you are a tomato producer here in this country, you don't have the freedom to take your tomato to the market. We've been in meetings with market queens and other kinds of things. Somewhere in this country it is accepted. You would think it is a monopolistic practice that you should remove, but I've had arguments with very reasonable people who said, no, that brings instability. There is no wastage and things like that. They know how much could go and do that. And the perverse effects flowing out of this is into post-harvest as well. You know about those huge tomato crates. How did they get to be huge? They got to be huge because you buy by the crate. Price is by the crate. So if you are a buyer in this country, you take your own measure, whether it is volumetric or whatever it is, and then you keep manipulating it, making it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And not only that, they have these huge crates that they can put in, and they stack tomatoes on top of them, just being greedy. They stack tomatoes and they put one crate on top of another. By the time they go to Accra, they are squished. Okay? Now then, you think the women who buy from them have some control over it. Well, these are monopolists. You can't pick and choose. You got to take the crate that's given to you, and see how all of that actually distorts. Is this going to change? I don't think this is going to change in this country, because it's that market queens and all of that is still very much accepted, and that does distort. Unless you have some huge growers that independently can challenge, take it to the market, supply to huge stores, and as it is happening, there are new tomato producers coming up that supply directly to them. So that's a problem. Now when you look at onions, it's somewhat different. This is my understanding from what I read. 90% of the onions purchased by lead farmers. There are aggregators within the villages. These are other onion growers. And 10%, interestingly, a speculation by government employees. I don't know to what extent it is true. This came from one of the reports. And nearly 70% is sold immediately after harvest because the storage facilities are not there. Again, the situation here is somewhat similar to tomato. You know, they are not able to, they are selling to their neighbors in their own villages. They're not able to take it to any other market. They're not able to store it. There is again the kind of vulnerability, but at least unlike tomato, you can at least sell it to somebody. Then the situation is, what I hear is there are 4 major companies in the southern markets who are importers. So depending on where the prices go, they import. They have nothing to do with domestic production, but they are essentially trying to import from elsewhere, from Burkina Faso, Niger, and even Holland, which funds this very program, also sells cheap onions. So again, the marketing situation is, how do you overcome that? That's really a tough situation though. Even if you bring about productivity changes, how are you going to deal with market situation? How is that with these market queens that are there? Are they going to continue to limit the tomato that's coming in? I'm hoping that production goes outside of this traditional system, and hence the traditional system becomes weak over a period of time. In terms of competitiveness, onion, obviously you have a smaller production potential, okay? Because what is planted here is just barely 1/4 of the area that's planted in Burkina. And then they take 3 crops annually, whereas Ghana, they take only 1 crop. The reason for taking only 1 crop is apparently the local variety is really not suitable for rain-fed cultivation. And on top of that, there is